That was shocking.
I don't think the dog is. I don't think the dog's dead, right?
Yeah, the
Just
dog is.
lost.
The, oh, I thought the dog died. I
I
don't.
don't know
I don't know. I don't really want to
because
pry.
I was trying to think. I don't know.
All right, I'm stream. Do you remember what
Okay.
happened last time?
Um, it's uh lore
Lore.
backstory.
Yeah. So we had um, Shi Qingquan and Ming Yi came over to Puchi Shrine,
Hmm.
and like Shilian didn't want to let them in because Hua Chung was there, and Ming Yi and Hua Chung have beef because he was like found in his basement, like all whipped and stuff. And then we got Shi Qingquan backstory where she's been hunted by this Reverend of Empty Words, this spirit that feeds off of misfortune. And then at the end of the chapter, we were talking about how Shi Qingquan can't go to her brother because her brother's about to go through a heavenly tribulation, which is like a trial. Um, it's like the thing that makes you initially ascend, but then you keep doing them to get more power. So he's about to go through like a big one. Okay, so the last sentence of that was it certainly wouldn't be good for him to lose focus. After all, failing to pass a tribulation meant, in turn, that one's divine rank would plummet. So now we're on chapter 51. Three Gods, One Ghost, Reverend Nowhere in His Sight, Part 1. I want to try and take care of that thing myself, Shi Qingquan continued sternly. All things considered, your highness has more experience with such entities, so are you free? If not, don't force yourself. Shi Qingquan had helped Shilian on many occasions in the past, so now that Shi Qingquan had come to him with an emergency, there was no way Shilian could decline and say he had the heart but not the power. But Hua Chung had come from far away as a guest, and he hadn't been here for more than a few days. If Shilian left, who was going to host Hua Chung? Although it wasn't like Shilian himself was a very good host to begin with. As he considered his options, Hua Chung smiled and propped his chin on one hand. Is Gaga going to try and catch a glimpse of that Reverend of Empty Words? If it wouldn't be a bother, will you bring me along? It's a rare monster, after all. I've never seen it myself. Much ashamed, but San Lang understands my predicament, Shilian thought to himself. Filled with gratitude for Hua Chung's thoughtfulness on the matter, Shilian nodded. Shi Qingquan didn't say anything on the subject. Of course he knew perfectly well that Hua Chung wasn't coming along to help him, but he at least wasn't coming to cause trouble. In the end, whether Hua Chung came or not meant nothing to him. The Reverend of Empty Words is an elusive creature, Shilian warned. Who knows when or where it will appear again? I couldn't tell you, Shi Qingquan replied. If nothing else, I plan on going to the imperial capital and reserving the best room at the best restaurant to drink for around 80 to 100 days straight. We'll put on plays and set off firecrackers every day. That will flush it out eventually. That's one way to do it, Shilian acknowledged. But even if it shows itself, we might not be able to capture it. The best way to win a battle is to know oneself and one's enemy. Has Lord Windmaster investigated its past prey? How does it hunt? We should see if there's any pattern. My brother already investigated that, of course. Shi Qingquan retrieved a scroll from his sleeve and spread it open. Julian scooted closer to take a look and was in awe in spite of himself. Amazing, amazing. Such taste! This creature really only fished for big catches. Every name on that scroll was a notable character in the mortal realm, and almost all of them had met tragic ends. Moreover, every one of said tragic ends was a suicide following a mental breakdown. There were those who had slit their throats after their troops met crushing defeat. There were those who made a clean exit with a white bandaged noose after their fortunes were ruined overnight. There were those who simply sank into the depths of despair after spending their entire lifetime seeking influence and affluence, only to achieve nothing for their struggle. They weren't necessarily defeated by the hand of the irreverent of empty words. They were overcome by their own fear of loss. Neither emperors nor kings were on that list. As sons of heaven, true rulers had a protective aura that prevented evil from easily invading their hearts. Generally speaking, those who had the potential to ascend also had natural spiritual shields enveloping their bodies that forced evil to stand down. This made Shilian suspect that whatever had attached to Shi Qingxuan wasn't something so simple. Perhaps someone behind the scenes was purposely targeting him. If that were the case, that person must be quite formidable. But Shi Qingxuan had been only a baby when he was marked, so how had he attracted such a character? Just then, Huacheng spoke. "Gega, may I take a look?" Shilian passed the scroll to him. "Here." Huacheng gave it a brief skim. "Who put this scroll together?" "My brother. What of it?" Shi Qingxuan replied. Huacheng tossed the scroll on the table. "Nothing, just that it's full of glaring mistakes. I suggest your brother try again." Hearing this, Shi Qingxuan was ready to throw a fit, or perhaps even fists. "Crimson rain-sought flower!" Shilian held him back and said apologetically, "Lord Windmaster, please sit down, sit down. Let it go. San Lang always talks like that. He doesn't mean it." "Always like that?" Shi Qingxuan sounded doubtful but sat down. Shilian turned to Huacheng. "San Lang, you said it's full of outrageous mistakes. How so?" Huacheng scooted over to him. They were now sitting much closer than before. Huacheng pointed at a few names. "These are wrong." Shilian looked at the names closely. All of them were known to be lawless, malevolently evil tyrants. "How do you know?" "Because I killed them," Huacheng said. "Doesn't this say that they all died by suicide?" Shilian asked. "I sent messengers to greet them, and they killed themselves before I made any further move," Huacheng explained. "Perhaps that doesn't count as my kill?" One couldn't truly say whether that counted, but at least he was honest. Shi Qingxuan's lips twitched, and he coughed uncomfortably a few times. "Can ghosts please not so bluntly describe how they kill people in front of heavenly officials? Can ghosts also please not openly discuss this with other heavenly officials in front of other heavenly officials?" Huacheng pointed at a few other names. "These are wrong too." "And who killed them?" Shilian asked. "Blackwater did them," Huacheng said. Shilian was taken aback. "Blackwater demon Xuan? Doesn't he always lie low?" "Doesn't mean he doesn't kill," Huacheng said. Then he addressed Shi Qingxuan. That esteemed brother of yours gave you a scroll that's inaccurate and full of errors. There's no heart in this investigation at all. That bundle of rags is nothing but a red herring meant to divert your attention. I suggest you rip it up and get to work researching another one." Shi Qingxuan snatched back the scroll. "My brother isn't like that!" Although his retort was weak, his voice was firm. Shi Wudu wouldn't be so careless when it came to his own younger brother, so there could be only one possibility. Every profession has its own specialists. Lord Watermaster would surely have borrowed another's expertise for this investigation, Shilian asked Shi Qingxuan. "May I inquire who actually put the scroll together?" After some hesitation, Shi Qingxuan replied, "Ling Wen." Let me drink. Shilian rubbed his forehead and stopped speaking. Although other heavenly officials cursed the palace of Ling Wen for its inefficiency, it still wouldn't be expected to make so many mistakes. This looked like a rough draft turned in to appease a deadline. The tumors seemed to share a good relationship, at least on the surface, but outsiders would probably never know what lay beneath. "Let me tell you another way to discern the difference between what's true and what's fake." Huacheng leaned back and continued. "Once the reverend of empty words sets its sight on prey, it goes for the roots as well. Not only will its targets suffer and die, the families and friends of said target will also be affected. As such, regarding those on this scroll whose own lives were the only casualty in their affair, whose friends and families remain alive and well, those names are wrong." Shi Qingxuan's face paled for a moment when he heard this, but he quickly regained his cheer and laughed dryly at Ming Yi. "Ming Shang, doesn't that mean you're in danger too? You're my best friend, after all." Ming Yi shifted to sit further away from Shi Qingxuan, his expression written with the sentiment that he'd rather not have Shi Qingxuan as his best friend. Please and thank you. This move brought him closer to Shilian. Huacheng's gaze swept over Ming Yi, sharp as a knife. Seeing that Shi Qingxuan hadn't forgotten to joke around even in times like these, Shilian couldn't help but smile. Nevertheless, he could tell Shi Qingxuan was still anxious. Rather, it was because of his anxiety that he had to use extra cheer to suppress it. Shi Chuan flashed his Windmaster fan and fluttered it 5, 6 times faster than usual, his black hair flying wildly in the wind. Let's go right now, to drink ourselves into oblivion, atop the tallest, fanciest tower. I have to see for myself if it'll dare to show its face with so many of us around. We've got strength in numbers. Lord Windmaster, please calm yourself, Shilian urged him. Wait for me for a moment. I've got a few small things to take care of in the shrine. Who knew how many days this trip would take? With 2 children and 2 mouths, plus a god-forsaken ghost possessing a man, he couldn't just leave them be. He considered trying to find someone reliable in the village to watch over them, but it seemed Hua Cheng knew his every worry and spoke up. If Gega must go, then go without worries. I've got hands to spare. Someone will take care of the shrine while you're gone. Shilian breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness for San Lang. It'll be better if there's someone here to watch over things. Hua Cheng smiled. Yeah, there needs to be someone watching over things. Watching over obviously meant different things to the both of them, but neither pried deeper. Ming Yi moved the altar table away and began drawing the teleportation array on the ground. Shi Qingquan's fan fluttered so rapidly that its form could barely be made out. By the way, Your Highness, I forgot to ask earlier, who exactly is that outside the door? How did I piss him off to provoke such rude words from his mouth? To be asked about only at the end of things, and in such an offhand manner, if Qi-Rong overheard, he'd no doubt suffer another attack of heartburn. As Shilian busied himself packing up Royer and Feng Xin, he thought it really was quite impersonable of Shi Qingquan. On the other hand, Qi-Rong hardly counted as a person. Didn't he announce his own title? What, that really is the Green Ghost? Shi Qingquan was surprised. With that face and that attitude? You really do have to see these kind of things for yourself. Shilian rubbed his forehead and briefly gave an account of what transpired the last few days, and upon concluding the tale reminded Shi Qingquan to keep it a secret, especially when it came to Lan Chinchou. While they spoke, Ming Yi finished drawing the teleportation array. The one Nan Fang drew last time had been crude and rough, and it had taken him ages to finish. Ming Yi was the complete opposite. His hands were swift and precise, completing the drawing with but a single sweeping motion. The circle he drew was cleaner and more accurate than if one used a compass and a ruler, and the characters were so neat and orderly they could have been mistaken for pressed prints. Shilian couldn't help but marvel. With the array completed, Ming Yi said, "Let's go." Shi Qingquan sucked in a breath and blew gently to extinguish the candlelight. Hua Cheng took the lead and was the first to push open the door. The little door creaked open into pitch blackness beyond. The air was thick with mold and dust, as if the door was connected to an old house that had been abandoned for many years. Following behind Hua Cheng was Shilian, who softly thanked Hua Cheng for taking the initiative to open the door as he passed. Then came Shi Qingquan, and the last was Ming Yi. Once he crossed through, he closed the door behind him. The moment it shut, an ominous voice came from the darkness behind the door. The place you wish to go will become the nightmare you never wish to recall. The instant Shilian heard this, he let loose with a kick. The door instantly collapsed from the impact. It was no longer a Puchi shrine behind the door, but rather a pile of trash. Once a teleportation array was used, it lost its effects. That intense kick roused thick clouds of dust, and as Shilian coughed, he was glad it wasn't the door Hua Cheng had made for him. With his sleeve covering his face, he asked, "Was that the Reverend of Empty Words?" Shi Qingquan tightly gripped his whisk and his Windmaster fan. "That's its voice! Has it been following me?" Shilian waved away the dusty air. "No. There were 3 heavenly officials and 1 ghost king in the shrine earlier. If something were following you, how could none of us notice? Clearly it only just arrived." "Calm down," Ming Yi advised Shi Qingquan. "I'm calm!" Shi Qingquan exclaimed. "I'm very calm. I calmed down a long time ago." Hua Cheng stood ahead and said leisurely, "Calm is good, but there's definitely something afoot. Does anyone know where we are?" Shilian looked around and wondered this as well. Weren't we headed to the nicest restaurant in the imperial capital? No matter how he looked at it, this old abandoned house looked nothing like any restaurant Shi Qingquan had spoken of. The 4 of them explored the place and found the entrance, but it was closed with massive locks. The matter of the locks was addressed by another kick from Shilian, and the door creaked open. What appeared before them was neither hell nor any such sort of mysterious, evil landscape. It was a perfectly ordinary, dull little town. Hua Cheng arched his brows. The imperial capital shouldn't look like this. Shilian agreed wholeheartedly. The aura of an imperial capital could not be matched by such a small town. He turned his head. Lord Earthmaster, did you make a mistake in your array? I didn't make any mistakes, Ming-Yi stated. This wasn't our original destination. Shilian immediately understood. It meant the creature had meddled. It had sent them here. And that's the end of the volume, Leon.
Wow.
How long have we been... It was not that long.
No.
Damn, we finished 3. Hell yeah.
Good.
Dude.
Oh my god, please let me fucking drink someone's blood.
Are you being a fucking vampire? Did you make the vampire guys?
Yeah, but it's not. This is a lot harder than. Who's this bitch? There's a lot of tourists in this area.
Okay, I want to read one more. Can I read one more?
Okay.
Drink. Chapter 52. 3 Gods, 1 Ghost, Reverend Nowhere in Sight, Part 2. It darted in and tampered with the array when we left Puchi Shrine, Shi Qingxuan wondered, then instantly dismissed his own theory. No, it couldn't have. That isn't possible, Shilian agreed. We had already opened the door, so even if it crept in to meddle afterwards, we should have still arrived at our original destination. The array was already activated. Changing it wouldn't have done anything at that point. It only had a split second to interfere. Which meant it happened in the moment after Ming-Yi had finished drawing the array, when Shi Qingxuan blew out the candles and Puchi Shrine fell into darkness. However, that contradicted Shilian's own story. But there were only the 4 of us in the shrine, Shi Qingxuan said. There had been 3 heavenly officials and 1 ghost king in tiny Puchi Shrine. Wouldn't they have noticed if there was anyone or anything extra? And if someone among them had meddled in the darkness, who was the most likely culprit? Shi Qingxuan couldn't help but steal a glance at Hua Cheng. Although he stopped himself quite quickly, Hua Cheng didn't miss it. He smiled. What's with that look? Personally, I think Lord Earthmaster is the most suspicious one here. Don't you agree? Ming-Yi's eyes also swept over. Rather than worrying about who meddled after the fact, consider whether the array he drew was wrong from the start, Hua Cheng pointed out. Ming-Yi neither refuted nor acknowledged the accusation, but Shi Qingxuan couldn't let this line of questioning continue. Hua Chengzi, you stop right there, all right? I know the 2 of you quarreled in the past, but Ming Shang really isn't like that. I dragged him on this expedition at the last minute to help me, so he has no reason to meddle. One doesn't always need a reason to do something, Hua Cheng said. Lord Windmaster, you're very suspicious too. Huh? Shi Qingxuan hadn't expected the tables to turn on him, and he pointed at himself. Who? Me? Mm-hmm. It's common for a wolf to cry wolf to shift the blame, Hua Cheng said. Why exactly are you here? If you and your esteemed brother are genuinely scared of the Reverend of Empty Words, why were those raggedy scrolls so sloppily cobbled together? It's not a stretch of the imagination to think that the 2 of you schemed to intentionally lead us here. It was easy to tell from his expression that he was being cheeky and spouting nonsense, but he made such a good point that anyone was now worth considering as a suspect. Even Shi Qingxuan was almost persuaded. Am I that ridiculous? Hua Cheng chuckled. The same logic applies to me. I'm not that ridiculous either. He would strike back with whatever others used to strike him, but Shilian was still busy mulling over the evidence, so he waved dismissively. All right, everyone, stop. Nothing's clear yet, and we've already started doubting our own people. Hua Cheng laughed out loud and stopped talking. However, his attitude was more than obvious. He was purely there for fun. He wouldn't help, but he wouldn't cause mischief either. There was no point in expecting anything from him, but there was also no need to guard against him. After thinking for a moment, Shilian said, "Actually, there's another possibility. When Lord Earthmaster was drawing the array inside the shrine, someone else might have already been drawing a stronger array on the other side of the door." Shi Jingquan had cast an isolation spell to seal Puchi Shrine and prevent Qirong from listening at the door and eavesdropping on their discussion. But that spell also made it hard for those on the inside to easily detect whether someone was tampering with things outside. When two similar spells collided, the more powerful one always won. And power wasn't solely based on the caster's abilities. It also depended on the materials used when spellcrafting. Ming Yi had used the aged cinnabar that Shilian picked up while collecting junk, stuff that had been discarded by his cultivation peers. If someone had used fresh blood to weave their own array, it would naturally be stronger. Shi Qingquan eagerly accepted that possibility. Outside the shrine. Could it have been the green ghost? Can he do anything in his current state? I don't think so, Shilian said. He won't even dream of moving for the next week. But it wasn't just him outside the shrine, Hua Cheng said evenly, an implication hanging from his words. In any case, let's not panic, and let's not hurt our trust in each other, Shilian said. After pacing for a few steps, he added, "But the monster's words were very strange. Why did it say that this place will become the Lord Windmaster's nightmare, that he'll never wish to recall? Are we going to encounter something here?" Shi Jingquan looked around and wrinkled his brows. "Wait, this place looks like..." Before he finished, Ming Yi's expression suddenly turned sharp. His hand struck out in a flash, and the move was aimed at the back of Shi Jingquan's head. "Lord Windmaster, look out behind you!" Shilian shouted. Thwump! Ming Yi's hand chop cracked a large rectangular object in twain. The object had tumbled down right as Shi Jingquan passed under it. He leapt a few paces away, patting his heart. "Phew, that was close." He looked down, and his pupil shrank. Shilian approached to take a look, and he tensed as well. The object was an establishment plaque, painted blue with golden characters, that proudly spelled the Temple of Wind and Water. Shattering the establishment plaque of a heavenly official's temple was an enormous taboo. Ming Yi dropped his hand, his expression icy. Shi Jingquan stood in numb shock for a moment, but he then spirited away the broken pieces of the plaque with a sweep of his sleeve. "Keep this a secret! A secret! Nobody speak of this," he said in a low voice. "If my brother found out that one of his plaques got smashed, he'd be totally furious." Julien turned to look around the room, and his tone was one of disbelief. "This is a temple of wind and water?" Indeed, the broken-down house they had been transported to was a temple of wind and water. The Watermaster was the god of wealth. No one hates money, so the temples that worship him always had donations in abundance. To see one of his temples desecrated was as unimaginable as seeing a bundle of cash discarded on the street, exposed to the elements and ignored by passerby. Shi Jingquan rushed back into the main hall. The interior of the temple was desolate from neglect and heavy with cobwebs and dust. He rummaged around, then finally pulled two wretched-looking divine statues from beneath a pile of rubbish. The divine statue of the Lady Windmaster was missing a leg and an arm, and the head of the divine statue of the Lord Watermaster was broken off altogether. The damage didn't look like it was done from decay, but rather like someone had used something sharp to smash them, as if they were venting immeasurable hatred onto the statues. The divine statues were extremely realistic too, almost lifelike. It was exceedingly unsettling to see them lying on the floor of this eerie old temple in such a state of abuse, one still wearing a curved smile on its face. Shi Jingquan hugged a divine statue in each arm. What kind of hatred provoked this? He wondered aloud. What grudge? Even though Shilian could sense a strong, malicious intent from this scene, he replied gently to keep Shi Jingquan calm. "Lord Windmaster, steady yourself. As long as there are those who worship, there will also be those who desecrate. It's a common thing in the mortal world. No need to pay it any mind. The creature must have set this up intentionally to fan fear in your heart and allow it to absorb your spiritual power." Ming Yi, however, was more succinct in his response. "Are you okay or not? If you can't handle this, leave." Shi Jingquan brushed away some of the dust off the divine statues. He gritted his teeth, gripping his Windmaster fan, and leapt to his feet. "I'm fine! Now I have to see what this creature's got up its sleeves." Let me drink. Let me turn on my Heated blanket. The four of them exited the rundown Temple of Wind and Water and walked around the little town. It was a very quiet, peaceful place. Not bustling, but modern and well kept. Nothing out of the ordinary. Hold on. Rather, the most peculiar thing there was the four of them. Their appearances, bearing, and dress were much too conspicuous to blend into a crowd of mortals. They ducked into a small alley for a costume change. Julianne was already dressed quite plainly, so he didn't need to change. However, the other three changed their looks thoroughly from head to toe. On one side of the alley, Shi Qingquan's voiced his critique of Ming Yi's new get-up. On the other side, Hua Cheng changed into a set of refreshing black robes. His long hair was tied up neatly and properly, which was a rare sight. Complemented by a white jade hair accessory, the new style changed his languid appearance into something more spirited. He looked like an extraordinarily handsome and intelligent young disciple of some renowned orthodox sect, as intensely eye-catching as always. An emperor simply couldn't look like a beggar, even if you forced him to dress like one. As he gazed at him, Julian couldn't help but remember the saying, "For men to impress, in black they must dress." He reflected on the profound truth of this statement. Once his mind came down from the clouds, he looked at the Lord's Wind and Earth Master, and remembered something. "Sunlong, there's something I've been meaning to ask you," Julian whispered. Hua Cheng fixed his sleeves. "What is it?" Julian clenched his hand into a fist, then pressed the fist to his lips. He cleared his throat lightly, and tried to sound extremely casual. "What's the verbal password to your private communication array?" To directly send a message to someone's private spiritual array, one had to have their verbal password. For example, to reach Shi Qingquan, one had to loudly recite in their mind the following doggerel. That's a word I haven't heard before. Doggerel. Lord Windmaster is divinely gifted. Lord Windmaster is funny and carefree. Lord Windmaster is kind and righteous. Lord Windmaster is aged sweet 16. Of course, only other heavenly officials didn't set up verbal passwords that were so embarrassing to say. Most were much more normal. The upper court heavenly officials didn't freely give away their verbal passwords. They only provided them to close friends or associates. As a supreme ghost king, Hua Cheng would naturally have the same standards. But although he and Shilian might not have known each other for long, their relationship was fairly good, and it was a little strange that they hadn't exchanged passwords yet. They'd always seen each other face to face every time there was something to address, so exchanging passwords hadn't ever seemed all that important. Julian had never asked for the verbal password of any heavenly official. He'd call out in the general spiritual communication array whenever he needed assistance. If he wanted to speak to anyone privately, he would just ask for them in there. Since this was the first time he was the one asking for someone's private communication array, he didn't have much prior experience and was a bit worried he might be acting too forward. And now Hua Cheng's eyes were twinkling, but the man didn't respond, so Julian felt a little awkward. "Is it inconvenient? If it is, don't worry, and don't mind me," he hurriedly added. "I was just asking, nothing serious. There's something I wanted to discuss privately later, which is why I made such a presumptuous request. I can also figure out a way to speak to you in secret." "It's not inconvenient," Hua Cheng interrupted him. "I'm very glad." Julian was taken aback. "Huh?" Hua Cheng sighed. "I'm very glad that Gege finally asked me. You never brought it up, so I thought it would be inconvenient for you, that you didn't want to exchange passwords with anyone. That's why I never asked either. But Gege, now that you finally asked, how can you dismiss it as nothing serious?" Shilian let out a breath of relief and brightened up, grabbing Hua Cheng's hand. "So we were both concerned about the same thing. It was my fault just now. My nothing serious was the unserious comment. I apologize to Sanlong. So, your verbal password is..." Hua Cheng's eyes shimmered, and he leaned over. "This is my verbal password, Gege. Listen closely. I'm only going to say it once." Then he whispered a phrase. Shilian's eyes widened once he heard. "What? Is that really it? Sanlong, you didn't make a mistake?" Hua Cheng was perfectly composed. "Yup, that's it. If Gege doesn't believe me, why not give it a try?" As if Shilian dared. Then doesn't that mean every time someone wants to talk to you, they have to mentally recite that phrase 3 times? Wouldn't that be extremely embarrassing? Hua Cheng snickered. I set it to that phrase because I don't want anyone to talk to me. It lets them know to back off. But if it's Gaga who wants to talk, I'm always free. Shulian felt a little incredulous. That's so mean. He hesitated. He wanted to initiate the private communication array, but he just couldn't bring himself to utter the password no matter how hard he tried. It was difficult, even in his head. Shulian pressed his hand to his face and twisted his head away, unable to make up his mind for the longest time. Seeing him fretting, Hua Cheng finally had his fill of teasing. All right, fine. If Gaga dare not recite it, then I'll be the one to reach out to you. What's your verbal password? Shulian turned his head back. Just recite Dao De Jing 1,000 times. Hua Cheng cocked an eyebrow. A moment later, Shulian heard his voice next to his ear. It's the phrase, just recite Dao De Jing 1,000 times, right? The two stood facing each other, but their lips were closed, and unspeaking. They were communicating with their eyes, whispering secrets to one another using a voice no others could hear. Shulian replied using the private communication array as well. That's right, I can't believe you weren't fooled. Hua Cheng blinked and continued to reply to his messages. I almost was. How fun. Shulian's delight was apparent as he blinked back. It must be known that this verbal password was something Shulian spent serious effort coming up with when he first ascended 800 years ago. He used it because he thought it was funny, but not many other heavenly officials appreciated the joke. Even after he revealed the trick, they were more speechless than entertained. Mu Qing told him bluntly, Your Highness, your joke is bad. Forgive me if I can't laugh at it. On the other hand, Feng Xin laughed to the point of rolling on the ground, screaming himself hoarse. But he laughed at almost any joke, no matter the quality, so sending him into hysterics didn't make Shulian feel the least bit accomplished. However, if Hua Cheng laughed, maybe it really was somewhat amusing after all. The original plan was to go to the best restaurant in the imperial capital to drink, but since they didn't make it to the imperial capital, it made no difference where they went. The group reserved a room at the biggest restaurant in town, and they lounged at the table, bored out of their minds. When the waiter brought their drinks, Shulian inquired, May I ask where we are? Although it was a strange, blunt question, it was still the most direct and effective way to gather information. The waiter was amazed. Did our honored guests not come because of our reputation? This is the town of Fugu. Reputation? What reputation? The waiter gave a thumbs up. Our town's fire social. It's a really famous around these parts. At this time, every year, a number of outsiders come to watch the spectacle. Shi Qingchuan was curious. What's a fire social? Celebratory festivities during folk holidays, Shulian explained. There will be busking, local plays, and so on. They're worth seeing. They were similar to the Shengyuan heavenly ceremonial procession of Shenlu back in the day. Ugh. However, heavenly ceremonial processions were sponsored by the monarch and hosted by the state. Fire socials were the entertainment of commoners. But it's not a holiday today, Shi Qingchuan commented. The closest thing is that tomorrow is Hanlu, the official end of autumn. It doesn't have to be a holiday, Shulian explained. Sometimes they're for commemorating a person or event. The common folks pick a special day to celebrate and have some fun. Just then, there was a huge commotion on the main street that stretched out below the restaurant. Move aside, move, someone was shouting. Women and children, don't stand around. Back away, the troops are coming. The four looked below, and what a sight they saw. Shulian's eyes widened. A long procession paraded down the main street, and everyone in line was painted with thick layers of vivid makeup and dressed in all sorts of bizarre costumes. There were also weapons embedded in each of their heads. Axes, butcher knives, iron tongs, scissors, implements both sharp and dull, all were deeply buried in their skulls, piercing their brains. Some even had their eyeballs squeezed from their bleeding sockets and dangling down their cheeks. Some had been stabbed all the way through their foreheads, and the weapons jutted out the backs of their heads in an exceedingly gory display. Every one of the paraders had tightly knitted brows and expressions scrunched in agony, and every face was covered in blood, and yet they continued to march forward amidst the trumpeting music like a procession of phantoms. And that's the end of the chapter.
Wow.
Wow.
But they spent like 7 million years just kissing up to each other.
yeah,
That one
yeah, yeah.
second.
He's like, what's your phone number? And then Hua Chang told him something like dirty. It's implied that it's like super fucking NSFW, and then he's like, I'll give you mine. And then Hua Chang's like, haha, your jokes are so funny.
Jokes are so funny.
Jokes are so funny. I like when he compares Hua Chang to like Mu Ching and Feng Shin. He's like, my two besties would never